Break the Ice podcast is presented by Superfood. Superfood Performance Nutrition has made a name for itself by feeding athletic organizations like the Washington Capitals both on and off the ice. If you have a high-performance team that needs fueling, check out mysuperfd.com for more information. Hey everyone, Mike Vogel here for WashingtonCaps.com with another edition of Break the Ice, and we're coming to you from Alumni Weekend here in Arlington, and joined by Caps forward Kelly Miller, longtime Caps forward Kelly Miller. And Kelly, I mean, you were here last year.
Yep.
You've been back for a few of these events. Just what's it like to wander back into the area and see guys that you played with, and just watch a Caps game, all this kind of stuff? It seems like some of you guys, it seems like this alumni thing has blossomed a little bit in the last few years, but also it's good to see some repeat guys coming back like yourself, and some new faces that seems like you guys are bringing in as time goes on here too.
Well, it's a lot of fun for us guys to come back, and obviously we've got tremendous memories of our time here with the Capitals. Great place to grow. Basically our families were, a lot of them grew up here, and to come back to this area just brings back some of those memories, and to see the guys and relive some of the old stories and the old feelings of, because you bond, and you're such a tight connection, and then you kind of go off and everybody does, lives their lives, and to take a moment to come back and remember what it was like, and feel that bond again I think is pretty special.
And you had a really fascinating career, I think. So let's spend a few minutes talking about it. And obviously, I mean, you and I from the same hometown, and your dad, I think, co-owned or ran a rink there. So you and your brothers were absolute rink rats, and your cousins as well. I mean, you guys are kind of the American version of the Sutter family to me back in the 80s, where you and your two brothers and your two cousins all ascended to the NHL and essentially ran right through, Michigan State on the way too. Yeah. So it's a really cool thing for me to see personally, for sure. But so what was that like, just being such a rink rat from such a young age? And I'm guessing, like, when you were growing up, I mean, at what point were you kind of driven to make the NHL? Because in those days, man, it was like a 98% Canadian league. I don't know how much of a dream it could have actually been in those days.
So my dream, actually, and the way I got hooked on hockey, was my dad used to take us to the Michigan State hockey games, and he was a ref. He helped work the score clock and things of that nature, and so he could get us in the locker rooms after the game. And there's nothing better as a little kid, getting in the locker room after a game, and they had the broken sticks. You're scrounging for those. They used to have these orange slices, and you'd be in there, stealing some of those. They had a pop machine, I remember, and so just being around that and that excitement. It was actually the old Dem Hall, which was just a cool little old barn that they played in at that time, and it just sparked the interest for me and the passion for me, and that was my dream, and probably my brother's dream, is to get to Michigan State and play there. And fortunately, my dad did own part owner of an ice rink, and we literally spent most of our days there. My mom was a figure skating coach. We would go, if we weren't on the ice, we were in the corner somewhere playing stickball, and then as I got older, I used to, when I was 16 and I could drive myself, the rink was only a mile away, but we'd go, and I'd get up before school and go and just shoot 500 pucks, and just, that's, if you want to get to the NHL, there's really, you talk about the secret. The secret is just to be on the ice all the time and have good coaches. Fortunately, my mom, she used to make me skate with the figure skaters, which I thought was just the stupidest idea, but was actually the greatest idea, because it taught me how to skate and gave me the right technique. And, I just remember those days. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever went out with the figure skaters, after she had pleaded with me to do it for about a couple months, finally agreed, and I just remember them lapping me, and I thinking, I got to work on my skating. And so, things like that, being around the rink all the time, that's how if you want to be in the NHL, that's what you got to do.
And you're the oldest of those 5 Miller boys who ascended to the NHL, so you kind of blazed the trail. And then you get to Michigan State. Obviously, Ron Mason, a legendary coach, and those were good teams. And but I thought what was really cool is you're drafted in what was it, 82,
Yep.
And that was your second year eligible. Were you expecting at all to maybe get drafted as an 18-year-old? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, in 82, the draft was not anywhere near what it is now. I mean, it was just essentially a conference call in Montreal. How did you even find out that the Rangers had drafted you in the ninth round that year?
So the first year where I was draft eligible, I didn't really have any, because I really, grew up in Lansing, played junior hockey in Detroit, and, I don't consider myself being, I wasn't a superstar by any means at that point. And so for me, I just wanted to get to Michigan State. And so after my freshman year, though, I had a good freshman year, and we had a good team at Michigan State. Ron Mason had a great program, did a fantastic job. And so, that started giving me notice. And actually I met, and I used to then also go out to a camp in Minnesota that Chuck Grillo was a scout at that time with the New York Rangers. And so I went out there, and during the summer, he saw me there. He was like, "Man, this kid's got something that And so he ended up, I think, influenced the Rangers to draft me in the next year. I think I was a 9th round draft pick, so it's not like they were using a top 3 pick or something on it. So, and it just worked out. I kept going to Chuck Grillo's camps and kept progressing and actually, after my junior year at Michigan State, I went to training camp with the Rangers. You could do that at that time, and that was a great experience. Craig Patrick was the general manager. Had a good camp, but he said, we sat me down after the camp and said, I think another year in college would be more beneficial to you. I mean, and sure enough, so I went back to college, had a great year. And I was an All-American that year, was a top, in the Hobie Baker finalist category, top 10, and joined the Rangers right after that season and played the last 5 games plus 3 playoff games. So, never looked back after that.
Yeah, you for a 9th round pick, you went right into the NHL and didn't play in the minors until you're in your mid-30s.
Yeah.
And honestly, Kelly, when you look at that 82 draft class, there are a dozen guys in the first 4 rounds of that draft that wound up playing over 1,000 games in the league. That was a good draft class. And then you get down to the lower reaches. In the 5th round, you have Ray Ferraro go to the Hartford Whalers. He played 1,000 games. 7th round, you had Doug Gilmour go to St. Louis, also 1,000 games, and then you in the 9th round. So 12 guys in the first 4 rounds, only 3 in the last, 8 rounds. And so you have a lot to be proud of there in that. And then you get to New York, and that's an interesting situation too. Big Apple, Madison Square Garden, mid-'80s. Phil Esposito's the GM, I think, by that time.
Sure. No, actually, Craig Patrick was still GM, but
Phil's the guy who traded you. He came in later.
And he came in the next year.
Yeah.
So
okay.
after that was Patrick's last year, and Ted Sater was the coach, and and so that whole experience in terms of I went from playing my final game at Michigan State. I signed a contract, and in my first game I'm carrying my bag into the Spectrum. I mean, so that's my first game from going from college to a game in the Spectrum. And I just remember walking into the locker room, and obviously at that time Philadelphia was still considered a very tough team.
Yeah,
they had some very tough players, and I just remember walking in that locker room, and you could feel the tension in the Ranger players, the veterans are there, because you knew that they're going to go out and fight for their lives. And so it was here I am carrying my Michigan State bag in. And So it was just surreal, and actually played fairly well that game. And I just remember that the next day, so we bused back to Madison Square Garden, and I got off, went to the hotel, and then so the next day, the practice arena's up in Rye, and I just remember, okay, um, here I am, how am I going to get up to Rye? And they said, well, Ron Greshner at the time lives in the city. You just need a cab over to Greshner's, and then he'll take you up to the Rye. And I just like, okay. So I jump in the cab, go over to Greshner's, go up. He's got an apartment, knock on the door, and this girl answers the door. It was Carol Alt. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute, where am I? What am I doing here? I mean, this is just, again, surreal. And, for a guy coming out of Lansing, Michigan, you're just like, wow, this is taking a whole different turn. But it was fun.
Yeah, Brian McClellan, George McPhee were on that team that first full season that you spent in New York. And you guys, Ted Sater's first year as a head coach in the league, too. And if I remember right, you guys had a nice little playoff run there, got to the third round. What was that first full season like for you there? And to have, how much value was there in that, getting that playoff run early in your career like that?
Well, there is, obviously great crowds here, but there's something about Madison Square Garden and the electricity in that building during the playoffs is just is
to
amazing.
This day, yeah.
It is just amazing, and it gives me tingles just thinking about standing at the blue line when they're playing the national anthem and doing all that for that game and that crowd, and it was just it was a great experience. We overachieved that year, I thought. George McPhee was on that team. I remember George. He was integral in actually us getting by the Flyers. We had to play the Flyers and get by them, and I mean he was. George is about this big, and he's fighting these guys that were just giants, and I'm just like, so everything we just scrapped and we fought and we figured out a way to get by, some good teams, and actually the Washington Capitals was one of those teams.
Second round.
And so, then we ran into Montreal. Montreal was pretty darn good, but so it was very cool experience. At that time, being in New York as a young kid, and that crowd and that scene was pretty amazing. And then, obviously I got traded, and to me, coming here was just as amazing because it was more of a family type organization. David Poyle was running things at the time, did a great job, and just really, Lou Struther, Dave Poyle. I mean, those guys were just tremendous people, and really created a real nice environment for families, and so and my wife and I started a family during our time here, and that so both worlds were kind of cool when they happened.
And you got traded on New Year's Day in that Bobby Carpenter trade, and I mean I marvel at that to this day because I think Bobby he'd been sitting out for like 4 or 6 weeks. I think it was just before Thanksgiving that he was essentially done. They told him to go home, and they were trying to. Everybody in the league knew that David Poyle was trying to trade Bobby Carpenter, and he still got pretty good value back in you and Mike Ridley in that deal. I mean, that's to this day, still one of the best trades, I think, in franchise history. But New Year's Day, I mean, what was that like for you? You're in the middle of your second full season, and it had to be a little bit of a shock.
It was a shock because I thought both Mike and I were doing really well with the Rangers. And so I remember my wife and I had just bought a place up in Chappaqua, which is north of New York City, and we'd been in there 3 months, and I actually spent New Year's Day. We didn't play that day, so we got a new garage door opener, and I was trying to install it, and I spent about 3 hours on it. Finally got it installed, and I got a call. My wife said, "You got a call," so I go in. It's Phil Esposito, and Phil says, "Hey Kelly, I got good news and bad news." He said, "The good news is we got Bobby Carpenter. The bad news is that we had to trade you and Mike Ridley for him." And so sure enough.
That's some bedside manner right there.
Yeah, so the next day, Mike and I are on a flight to Washington, and the rest is history. But it did turn out really well for both of us. Like I said, we came to an organization that, was really doing well. I mean, David, we were seemed like to be in the playoff hunt every year, and it just was a lot of fun. We had a great group of guys here, and I still enjoy seeing Rod Langway when we come back to these things. And, you think about the defensemen that we had with the Scott Stevens and the Larry Murphys and guys like that.
Yeah.
And Ben Gustafson, I mean, what a player he was. And so, Mike Gardner, it was just a lot of cool memories. And when coming back, a lot of those memories, when I see Gardner's picture up on the wall there, Dale Hunter, who, was basically here the same time I was. I mean, it's cool to think back in those days.
I mean, you guys had a pretty stable core, not unlike what's gone on here over the last 15 years. There was a pretty stable core of you guys that stayed together for a while, and they tried to, build in around you guys, and just couldn't seem to get over the hump a lot of times. Just a lot of just really bad luck, it seemed like, in the playoffs. And I mean, specifically, I can think of two games that it had to have. In the moment, I'm sure it was brutally disappointing. The Easter Eve game against the Islanders and the 4-OT game here against Pittsburgh in '96, I guess it was. But I mean, it's got to give you some sense of pride too, that to have played in games that were marathons like that. At least now, looking back at it, I'm sure there's still some lingering disappointment too. But I mean, what is that like to have to go out and with the stakes being that high, to have to play essentially 7 periods of hockey?
It's it is an amazing to look back at it, and I just remember during those games. I mean, obviously you're just thinking about the next shift, and you're trying to get as much water into you because the water is just flowing out of you like crazy, and it's very difficult, and what made it more difficult in those games is that the referees just let the game go. So, it was more like tackle football than it was, than hockey. I mean, just to get to the net, I mean, you're going to get tackled, you're going to get jumped on. I just remember those games were like rugby matches. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And so it really was a shame that anybody had to lose after 7 periods. And but unfortunately, we ended up on the wrong side, a couple times there, and but fortunately, we had Ole Kolzig come along, and he really carried us in 1998, and that was fun getting to the Stanley Cup Finals, and I'm glad I was able to. Although we didn't win that, I was glad that I could experience that and get to that point, and so when they won it in 2018, I mean, I was jumping up and down in my living room because. I just remember that was always our goal, is to get to that Stanley Cup and win the Stanley Cup. And for the Caps organization to finally do it, just for me as an alumni, was like a pretty special moment. So. And
you alluded to the '98 run, and by that time you and Dale were still here, Craig Berube, Calle Johansson. It had to mean more, and Ole too. All of you guys dated back to the 80s in the organization, so it had to mean more to you guys. But also it was kind of cool that was the first season of moving from Landover to downtown, and it was a kind of the beginning of a little bit of a new era in Caps hockey. What was it like to be in the organization at that point where you're making that mid-season shift to a downtown arena, and then you guys wind up going on this really fun and kind of improbable run at times where, I mean, you guys, I think, were the 5th seed, and then you wind up with home ice essentially up to the Cup final.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, Landover was a special arena. I mean, we really enjoyed playing out there, but the Landover's arena was the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And so to come from middle of nowhere to all of a sudden we're driving downtown and coming into this area, into the rink in downtown, and I just remember it was such a beautiful rink, and obviously the locker rooms and everything else were just that much more special than we had in Landover, because Landover was obviously a much older rink. But just coming down here and being in the middle of the city, but it's funny because last night we went. We go to the game and you walk out afterwards, and just all the restaurants and everything Well, there was nothing here when Mr. Poland, who orchestrated all that, brought the building downtown here. There was nothing. I mean, there really, and to see it now, with all the just everything going on and such a vibrant area, it is really kind of special. And for him to have that foresight, that to do that and to what it would bring to this area is just, I think, tremendous.
It's incredible the way that the area has blossomed in the 25 years since the rink is open. And every time I'm in Detroit now, I think about that when I go to Little Caesars, and I can't wait for that area to experience the same thing, because I think Little Caesars is the gem of the league for me. That's maybe my favorite building to go to. I want to talk about like some other aspects of your career. I think for me, when you were playing, you were a thinking man's hockey player. You played a very cerebral game. You read and reacted impeccably, I thought. You had a nose for the net when you were good at forechecking, back checking, all the kind of things that guys saw as being the less sexy parts of the game. You're Selke finalist. Mm-hmm. At one point, you signed a offer sheet with the San Jose Sharks, and it was pretty early in their existence. And what I remember is that there was something kind of squirrely about it to me at the time, and maybe I'm missing something here, but you sign the offer sheet, and then it's up to the Caps to match it, which they did, but I think the original offer sheet had a no trade clause, and somehow the Caps got the league to pull that out.
Yeah, it's kind of a blur now, but I mean, obviously there was no free agency. My contract ended, but in order for somebody to pick me up, they would have to basically, Washington had the right to match. And so, there was a baseball player, and this all goes back to my agents at the time, which were the Rich brothers, and they came up with a strategy to, structure a contract where if Washington did match, that they would have to, match all these different things. It would kind of like trigger some stuff, and that's that. Unfortunately, fortunately, I mean, things work out. I mean, so at the time, Mr. Bettman took those things and said, no, those you can't have those, and so it allowed Washington the match. But in hindsight, it was good. I came back to this I stayed with this organization, which I love, and we had another great. I don't know what's 4, 5, 6 years I played here and
made the playoffs every year.
Made playoffs and went to the Stanley Cup Finals, and so everything happens for a reason. Always that's kind of my mantra, and for at the time when you're going through it, you're like, what's going to happen, but everything happens for a reason, and I'm glad that it worked out the way it did.
Also, you played over 300 consecutive games there in the early 90s, which that was not a shrinking violet type of a league in those days. To what do you attribute the ability to stay that healthy over that stretch of time in that era of the NHL?
Yeah, well, you got to learn when to get out of the way. Is always helpful, and I think being it's important. Staying healthy is a combination of, obviously your workouts and what you do in the off season and how you treat your body and all those kinds of things, but also an awareness on the ice of when's not a good situation to have your head down or and so just, I think I had a pretty good combination of that. And fortunately I was pretty injury free, and there were some times when I got hit pretty hard, but fortunately, I'm kind of built like a spark plug or a fire hydrant in terms of, and so that allowed me to absorb some of those hits, and so that's, I think that it's just amazing. You say over 1,000 games, and I think about that, and that's a lot of games, and to be able to do that year after year is pretty special, and so I'm glad I was able to do that.
And when you left and when you retired, you were the Caps all-time leader in games played and in the playoffs as well. I think you were tied with Dale in that one. So a really good run here in Washington.
Yeah.
Also, that lockout of 94, 95, I seem to remember you being involved in the PA then and being part of that group that was able to break that and get guys back out onto the ice. And that was not long after the whole offer sheet thing. What was that like being involved in the players union and in those negotiations in those days? Because for me, the history of the Players Association, there's obviously a lot of darkness there with what happened to Ted Lindsay way back when he was trying to get it off the ground, and then it got even worse when Alan Eagleson was essentially stealing from all of you guys, and it's come a long way since. But I feel like that time in the early 90s was where you guys were kind of planting your feet and planting flags, and I think it kind of took off from there.
Yeah, I think in '89 when there was the switch between Alan Eagleson and Bob Goodenow, I think it was an important time for players. I think certainly me looking back, the salaries took a big jump.
Yep.
And after he got involved, and he and it was fortunately. Pensions got better. A lot of things got better at that point, and so that was a very difficult period, and at the same time, a very important period. And you mentioned '94 with the lockout. I mean, there's nothing more difficult than a lockout. When you're trying to, I was on the executive committee, and when you're trying to of the Players Association, when you're trying to keep 700 players together, when you're battling against an ownership group that is keeping 30 some individuals together, that's a hard thing. And there was many very difficult conversations as a member of the Players Association to members that had very good questions and concerns, and guys in their last year of their contract, and that are near the end of their careers, and young guys who maybe didn't have much money built up, and how are they going to survive? And so very difficult conversations. I actually resigned my position after that negotiation because going through that was very taxing and very difficult, and the pressure is enormous, and you do your best, but I'm glad that I didn't have to go through that after that point. I mean, because going through it once was enough.
Yeah, I mean, your on ice job is taxing and arduous enough without getting into all that. That's
the business of hockey, though. I mean,
yeah,
that's and you're right, because as a hockey player, you just want to play hockey. You just want, I mean, that's what you do. You come to the rink, your routine. You want to just play hockey. You don't want to think about salaries and things of that nature. But at the same time, when you're looking at an average NHL career is 5 years? I don't know what it is now, but at that time the average NHL career was like 5 years. Mm-hmm. Well, shoot, you better make hay, because or have what am I going to do after hockey type plan, and for a lot of guys that's a very difficult thing, that transition from something that you've loved and done day after day after day, and then all of a sudden it stops, and it stops quick. I mean, it's not like it lingers on, and so it usually stops pretty quick, and then you're not. It's tough. It's a very difficult thing to prepare for.
And you're in your own case, you wind up. I think your body kind of broke down a little bit there at the end, and I know you got a season in Grand Rapids, which I think is kind of cool, just to go back and play in your home state. I'm sure you would have preferred to be playing in the NHL at that point.
There's a story to that. So actually, after I retired from the Caps, I was done. I was like, and so Guy Chiron was the coach in Grand Rapids, and my brother Kevin was playing in Grand Rapids, and so I wanted to get into coaching after I was done playing.
Yeah.
And so I went down. I had a meeting with Guy Chiron, and I said, Guy, I'd like to get into coaching. Do do you have room as another assistant? I will be an assistant coach, and you don't have to pay me anything. I just want to learn the business of being a coach. Yeah. And so sure enough, he said, you know what? Yeah. We got room for you. You're going to be our eye in the sky. We'd like you to work with players that are injured and things of that nature. And I was like, this is great. I mean, to sit in those coaches' meetings and watch them plan their practices and do all that from it's a different perspective from when you're playing, when you're a coach and you're worrying about 20-some guys. And so it was very valuable. And I did that. So, they played an 80-game season. So about 60 games in, we were Ottawa's farm team, and Ottawa had a bunch of injuries. They had a bunch of guys go down, so they took the best players out of Grand Rapids. We had some injuries, and I just remember sitting in the coach's room one day, and they're like, man, we're thin. And so they looked around, and they said, Kelly, you think he still, can play? And I was like, that first year out, you're still, I mean, let's face it, you still think you can play. Yeah. You still want to play. There's that little piece in you that, like, yeah, and so I agreed to it. And I think they paid me like $1,000 a game, and I was going to donate it to charity. And so I'm thinking, I'll play some games, maybe, 5 games, maybe 10 games. And I ended up playing the last 20-some games, 26 games of the season. And I remember the first series, though. The first series sticks out in my head because the first series was a 3-3, which in the NHL we don't play 3-3.
No.
And so all of a sudden I'm playing 3-3, and I think we're in, I don't know, we might have been in Kalamazoo or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but I just remember thinking, I need to retire. This is it. I mean, and so I kept thinking that every game the guys from Ottawa will come back, and it didn't happen that way. I ended up playing the rest of the time, but it was good for me because it really, literally, I knew after that little stint that I was done playing, focused on coaching, and ended up, Guy Schron got the head coaching job with Anaheim Ducks. Mm-hmm. I went about halfway through the next season. I went out and joined him as an assistant, and then I joined Peter Laviolette the next 2 years with the Islanders, and that was just a tremendous experience. I mean, obviously Peter was here, just a great coach, great person. Yep. Him and his wife and his family are just magnificent. And just to have that experience on Long Island and with the Islanders organization at that time was pretty cool.
Agree on all counts on Peter Laviolette for sure. Yeah. Last thing before we let you go, it's wild to me that looking at those late 90s and early 2000s Caps teams, how many guys stayed in the game or went into coaching. What was it that was in the water in Piney Orchard in those days? Because honestly, Kelly, when you look at it, it's like more than half the roster. Like, I don't think if you would have told me that, then like, sure, there's a bunch of guys who were pretty smart, and I could say, yeah, that guy, he'd make a good coach. But man, it's crazy to me. Like, I mean, guys like Yogi Svetkovsky. I mean, it's just wild. Like, you could go right down the list to the fringe guys on those teams, and it seemed like they all went into coaching.
Yeah, I don't know what the reason is for that. I mean, obviously Dale Hunter was, I played with him I think all 13 years here, and I used to have my locker next to his, and he just was a great hockey mind. He always has been, and just we had tremendous conversations, and and so I think you just you learn from each other, and that you mentioned that we had a whole group of guys. I mean, Berube. That was our line, was actually Hunter, Berube, and myself for the Stanley Cup Finals, and it's just you're just talking, you're always engaging and thinking strategy, and those guys are both brilliant people, and it was just fun to be around, and you had a whole crew of those type of folks that were just good hockey minds, and it's probably why we we're so successful all those years is because we had a lot of good, smart players who understood the game and what it took to be successful.
Well, it's great to see you again. Great to spend some time sort of going down memory lane here. And
yeah, it is cool.
A lot of fun, and look forward to seeing you here again next year for sure.
That's great. Great talking with you, Mike, and always good to see you.
Thanks to Kelly Miller for spending some time with us on today's edition of Break the Ice. Superfood Performance Nutrition fuels the Washington Capitals players and staff on and off the ice. Each bite is energy-packed, highly nutritious, and engineered to boost recovery time. When they're not feeding pro athletes, Superfood is bringing the same high-quality nutrition to offices nationwide through their flagship corporate meal program, Simply Lunch. So if you have a high-performance team that needs fueling, check out mysuperfd.com for more information.